I have been with him from the days of Banjul, the days of Abuja, the days of...
The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft.
He is a wealth of knowledge. Please listen to Ndangham. He is also a member of the Presidential Advisory Council and chairs the way.
The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft.
Let's listen to our most respected Honorable Chairman, Ndangham.
The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia,
Augustine, I know you
draft.
can hear me. As soon as you see yourself on the camera, just start speaking.
The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft. People of Ambazonia, draft.
Let's listen to our most respected Honorable Chairman.
The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft. People of Ambazonia,
Augustine, I know you can hear me. As soon as you see yourself on the camera, just start speaking.
The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian
There's
to
sound
do right now
contradictory.
is to draft.
There's sound contradictory.
And draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft. People of Ambazonia, draft.
I want to start by thanking President Samuel Sako for speaking at this ACT Town Hall. And each time I have spoken at an ACT meeting, I have always started by saying I joined ACT because I was invited into ACT by President Samuel Sako, and I accepted and attended that ACT meeting. Having said that, I just want to say today a few remarks about we will be speaking on independence by joining. It is what we got at the end of our decolonization. Instead of decolonization, it is the title we made that the UN conducted a plebiscite on in our country. And it is a striking title in our history because independence by joining was in fact a mockery of the word independence. Today we are engaged in an armed conflict, and if the question, what is the source of this conflict? What brought about a conflict? Uh, you will hear a variety of answers. Is the conflict, is the source of this conflict the fact that the United Kingdom imposed a political union on the two United Nations Trust territories against the expressed wishes of the British Southern Cameroons and French Cameroons? Is this it? Point one. Is that the source of the conflict in Cameroon? Two. Is it the argument of the French Cameroon that democracy is the rule of the majority, and since British Southern Cameroons is only a quarter of the population of Cameroon, it should be integrated and assimilated into a one and indivisible Cameroon? Is this second point, the source of the problem that has led to armed conflicts in Cameroon? Three, is it the fact that President Biya had the audacity on the 30th of November 2017 to openly declare seceding and that he was fighting terrorism in the northwest and southwest region? Is it three, the source of the conflict we have? Four, is it the repeated argument by President Biya's Republic of Cameroon that if you come into someone's house, it is for you to accept what the owner of the house eats and drinks without complaining, and accept the way he runs his house, what he eats, what he drinks, without complaining, and be courteous to accept all. Therefore, the United Nations, the United Kingdom, neither of these nor the British Southern Cameroons can impose federation to replace the unitary state which the sovereign state of the Cameroon adopted for itself. Is that the source of the problem we have? Is it marginalization of Anglophones who are treated as second-class citizens and sidelined from key positions in the executive arm of government? Is it this point five? Is it the claim by France that British Southern Cameroons was un petit cadeau de la reine? Is that the source of the conflict? Or, as I believe, all these and much more. Of course, at the root of the armed conflict between the two former trust territories is the fact that of the two, one was decolonized and the other was not decolonized, but surprisingly ceded to the other. Of course, the unlawful transfer of British Southern Cameroons to French Cameroons on terms that have remained unknown till today is at the root of the conflict. Of course, the claim of France that British Southern Cameroons was un petit cadeau de la reine, and France's ridiculous claim that the present conflict in Cameroon was, strictly speaking, a domestic matter to the Republic of Cameroon is one root cause of the conflict. Of course, France's, which Anglophones in Cameroon must never ever be allowed to cross, taken together with France's mobilization of French colonies in Africa to vote against the independence of British Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia, is one source of standing tension between the two UN trust territories all along, has ignited what is happening in Cameroon at the moment. France happens to be the only country in Europe to have sent troops to assist Republic of Cameroon in her invasion of the British Southern Cameroons, and however, we can assure France that it is in her long-term interest that there be peace in the Gulf of Guinea and between the two fighting states. The protracted conflict between the British Southern Cameroons and the former French Cameroons is most certainly not in the long-term interest of France, both France and the United Kingdom. We thank the British government for voting in 1961 to support the independence of British Southern Cameroons to commence on the 1st of October 1961. We thank the British government for this legal statement, which is today one thing that Britain, Southern Cameroons agrees completely with the British government. And this statement is extracted from British file. It is the standing legal argument which Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia agrees with 100%. And I quote, "The people of Southern Cameroons accepted joining the Republic of Cameroon after considering the constitutional offers which the Republic made in the two communiques. Those communiques have become the terms of a constitutional contract which the Republic of Cameroon is obliged to honor and has accepted to honor and has accepted to honor, it is submitted that it is clear beyond peradventure that the Republic of Cameroon has contracted to receive the Southern Cameroons as an equal sovereign state and at one and the same time to form with it a federation of two equal sovereign states. This is extracted from the British declassified files. The rest of it, the story, the British rule in our country, in fact, the rest of it is ambivalence. In fact, a series of ambivalences culminating in the mortifying and cringeworthy fact that in the midst of the war between British Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia and French Cameroons, the British administering authority of British Southern Cameroons Britain was signing a trade deal with President Biya in the midst of this invasion. How embarrassing. In Southern Cameroon's struggle for de-annexation, we have looked at Britain to be in the forefront of the struggle for this territory to be de-annexed. And it is clear as daylight to us that the British government ought to be leading in this struggle and ought to be telling France to hands off British Cameroons. For 60 years, the United Kingdom has largely been looking the other way and signing trade deals, while Republic of Cameroon and France are siphoning the natural resources of Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia. In the last 60 years, we have said one consistent thing over and over. Grave injustice was done to the people of Southern Cameroons, also called Ambazonia, in the process of decolonization, and the territory of British Southern Cameroons was never, till today, was never ever decolonized, but classified in UN sources as decolonized by the United Nations. We give praise and glory to God for the late Pafoncha's rule. We give praise to God because before he went down to his eternal rest, Pafoncha discovered that some of the things that the British were telling him as Prime Minister of Southern Cameroons as coming from the United Nations were simply not true. And the United Nations knew nothing about those points which the British passed to his government as coming from the United Nations. We praise the Almighty God. We thank God that Dr. Foncha actually put this down in written form, in writing, and gave to the British government. Today, we know with certainty that it was not the United Nations that decided to conduct a plebiscite in southern Cameroons on independence by joining, independence by joining, yet surprisingly leave out the third choice of independence itself. So that plebiscite was simply a plebiscite on, do you want to join Nigeria or Republic of Cameroon? Practically, the United Nations was conducting a plebiscite on independence but ruled out the choice of independence. Well, again I repeat, grave injustice was done to the people of British Southern Cameroons, also called Ambazonia, in the process of its decolonization. And although in doing that practically, the British said it was the United Nations, we now know that the United Nations did not know some of these things. And if this is the fact at the heart of our problem, someone may say that we are complaining, that we are crying over spilled milk, that it is questionable all this we have said, whether it is true. At one time, I was ill and admitted in the BBH hospital in Bansal. And while lying on my sick bed near the window, there was a patient, a young man who had a disease, and twice on successive days, I saw doctors outside my window and heard what they were discussing. They were asking this doctor to give his views. This one will give, this one will give, and this one will give. They will send the matter to the lab, ask for that. And they came back the next day, the lab results were out, and none of the views. It was a problem. The young man was getting worse and worse. In Bansal, there are two well-known mission hospitals, and the doctors in these two hospitals can be credited for working as scientists. So if there's a problem in Shishong Hospital, the doctors refer the matter or consult doctors in BBH. If there's a problem in BBH that they think a better doctor in Shishong can solve the problem, these doctors ask the other doctors in the other hospital. Well, the young man I was talking about, he died the next day. But what I'm saying is, there was injustice. And someone would say, no, that's your own view. That's the view of Southern Cameroonians. But let us learn from the doctors and ask other views and look at the views of statesmen who saw that was done to the people of Amazonia in their decolonization. Let us go back at the time and look at other views from statesmen of the time, what they thought about the decolonization of Amazonia. If my pictures are there, I want to start with Mr. Clemens. Can I get a picture of Mr. Clemens Zablocki? Can the ABC help me project the picture of Mr. Clemens Zablocki? If I don't see the screen,
number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft. The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft. The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft. The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft. The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft. The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft. The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft. The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft. The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft.
Why the war draft is a must now. Fellow Ambazonians, after 5 years of relentlessly fighting for the liberation of our homeland from the genocidal occupation of French Cameroon, it's very important that we remember why we are fighting and why it's so absolutely necessary that we continue to fund the struggle by joining the war draft and making even greater sacrifices than before. When the United Nations General Assembly in Resolution 1608-XV of April 21, 1961 granted independence to the Southern Cameroons, Ambazonia, they did not expect that 61 years after, this territory will be forcefully annexed and colonized by a belligerent neighbor. It must be noted here that the territory of the Southern Cameroons had already attained self-government as early as 1954, a status we enjoyed up to 1972, when the state of West Cameroon, Southern Cameroons, was illegally annexed, overrun and occupied by French Cameroon. And because the Southern Cameroons within secure internationally recognized boundaries, she had a functional police force under the direct command of the Prime Minister and head of government, including a mobile paramilitary wing that played the role of a territorial self-defense force. It was this vibrant territorial force that was illegally and surreptitiously disbanded by the Yaoundé regime in the mid-60s, when our nationalist leader and head of government.
Okay. Well, fine. I can see the images. So I did not, I don't know where I stopped because I kept talking, and discovered that I was off. So I was trying to bring to you the views of statesmen from different countries about the Southern Cameroons, what was done to the Southern Cameroons, the injustice that was done to Southern Cameroons, the wrong that was done to British Southern Cameroons. And I started with the United States citizen Congressman Clement Zablocki. I think his picture is the first on the screen. And he is the one, I said that he is the one. I have to go back and repeat what I said, not knowing that I was not. He is the one who led the United States delegation to the meetings in the United Nations at the time of our decolonization. And when our independence was granted, it is this U.S. statesman, this leader of the United States team, Congressman Zablocki, who came from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I say I was using the word who came because he is no more. May God bless his soul, and till we meet him. Who formally addressed the congratulations of the United States government to the people and country of British Southern Cameroons. And I was trying to say, if you look at what Congressman Zablocki said to us as Southern Cameroons, as Ambazonia, we can see that on that day, that particular speech was an outstretched hand of diplomacy to the people and country of Amazonia. It was an outstretched because of not only the thing that he said, not only in the context in which he said it, addressed the United States position, congratulations to Southern Cameroons, but also turned around and rebuked the United Nations for what they were doing in Southern Cameroons. This was the United Nations in front of the the United States delegation in front of the United Nations, telling the United Nations that what they had given to Southern Cameroons as independence by joining, what they had done to the Southern Cameroons in a rush, forcing them to join the Republic of Cameroon, will not work in future. It was going to be a future disaster. This was the United States. Unfortunately for Southern Cameroons, unfortunately for our country, that outstretched hand has been hanging there since 1961 because we did not hold. It required of Southern Cameroons immediately after independence to have sent a delegation to the United States to accept and thank them for what they said about our country. And if we did that, even though we didn't do that, the United States today, by implication, is the allies of British Southern Cameroons. It is the one country we should tell our problem to and ask assistance to, even if it is arms assistance because we are being attacked. We ask it. If they refuse it, no problem. But the fact that the first country to recognize our independence and to tell the United Nations where they were wrong, frankly, was the United States. We thank the United States for. But since then, we think the United States is not doing enough to rescue Southern Cameroons from annexation. The next statesman on the screen is Pierre Mesmer of France. Pierre Mesmer of France is the one statesman, an honest statesman. He held so many posts in French government, including the prime ministry, but he worked in Cameroon. And when all this disaster was happening, he was in Cameroon. When the Fumban conference was holding, he was in Cameroon. He is the one to have told the world, or who did tell the world, the first person to tell the world that British Cameroons had been annexed. The word annexation came from Honorable Pierre Mesmer. He said that what in Fumban was an annexation. That John Foncha came there. He had nobody behind him. The British were not there. Yes, the British were not there. Ahidjo came there with a team of lawyers, jurists from France. And rightly speaking, if Ahidjo summoned that meeting and the Southern Cameroon's delegation arrived and they saw that Britain, the administering authority, was not there, they should not have held that meeting. They should have aborted the meeting, postpone and go and persuade the British administering authority to attend. This was a process of decolonizing Southern Cameroons. We were not part of the Republic of Cameroon at that time. So Fumban to us, Southern Cameroons today, was and is an unauthorized conference. It is a conference that, though they say it was a constitutional conference, the Republic of Cameroon undertook to revise its own constitution, pass it as law in its own parliament, and imposed it on Southern Cameroons without the parliament of Southern Cameroons in Boya having anything to do with it. It was a crisscross conference. That is, it was, here was a member of the United Nations. The United Nations is dealing with a process of decolonization of the British Southern Cameroons. And here was that member state given instructions in Article 5 of Resolution 1608, given a member of the United Nations, given instructions as in paragraph 5 of Resolution 68, you, Republic of Cameroon, British government, government of Southern Cameroons, sit down and work out all the details that is required for these two territories to join. And the Republic of Cameroon pushes that assignment by the highest organ of the United Nations, the General Assembly, who pushes it aside, convene your own internal, your own conference within the time limit, the time space between April 21 and 1st October, within the time frame given by the United Nations General Assembly, you convene an unauthorized conference in Fumba, and there you amend your own constitution, sign it into law, and impose it on the people.
Hello, Daddy. Daddy,
Yes.
I know you can hear me.
Yes.
Pa, thank
Yes.
you. Thank you very much. I don't know. The organization is requesting that perhaps you just have about 10 more minutes. So try to run.
And
Thank you very much, Daddy.
Anyway,
Thank
I
you.
am saying that we will remember Pierre Mesmer, a French citizen, for drawing the attention of the world that annexed in Fumban. The next person, this gentleman, Lord Thompson, is a British citizen, and you can read what he wrote. It is there in Hansard. It is a public document. He told British that what they were doing, that Britain had the experience of giving independence to many countries in the world, but what they were doing in southern Cameroon was absolutely a blunder that should be avoided. The next person on the screen is Ndangham. This is the second United Nations Secretary General. And you would like to know that after the United Nations had taken the decision to conduct a plebiscite in South Cameroon, Ndangham went and studied that matter and saw that it was absolutely wrong. It was wrong for the United Nations to be conducting a plebiscite to block the United Nations Trust Territory from achieving independence. And to the credit of this European diplomat and second Secretary General of the United Nations, he flew to Buea to tell the British that the plebiscite coming in southern Cameroon was absolutely wrong, and he wanted to change it and have a process put in place by which the British Southern Cameroons would achieve its independence. He told this to the British authority on his way to the Congo. And he said when he came back from the Congo to New York, he would call a meeting to arrange to change the content of that plebiscite. He went to the Congo and, as we know, had a plane accident, and he never came back out alive from the Congo. The picture is Mr. Ian Gis, United Kingdom, a parliamentarian, I don't know if I can lay hands on what he said. He was one person who was actually in Cameroon and helped conduct the plebiscite. And this is what he said of the plebiscite later on in the British Parliament. And I quote, "It reminds me that some years ago I served in a plebiscite in the southern Cameroons, and we were told we were to tell the people of that particular colony that they were to become independent by choosing to join one of their two large neighbors. That was the way in which this little group of independent. They were to be lost inside the 7 million people of the Cameroon Republic or inside the 50 million people of the Republic of Nigeria. That was to make a mockery of the word independence." I'm going to stop here. If there are questions, if there's time for questions, I will take them. But I've given you what we think is the problem that brought about our dilemma and war. If I have time to continue in another lecture, I will go on to what, in my view, are the proposed solutions, or what we should tell the Republic of Cameroon and the United Nations and Britain and France. Are there any questions, or we close it here? Take it up another day. Hello? Was I cut off again?
The information you gave and you have given, you have just done what an encyclopedia would do. So every one of us who have heard and we have learned.
Hello?
There should be no questions.
Was I cut off again?
So we thank you for the presentation. And that satisfies the agenda item. And we thank you very much. You just proved to us that you're an encyclopedia. We appreciate that. And you have given. We will move and you have just done what an encyclopedia would do. So every one of us who have heard and we have learned. Hello? There should be no questions. Was I cut off again? So we thank you for the presentation. Right. No questions. No questions. Just satisfy the agenda item. We just needed the information we have. Thank you, Pat. We will move on the agenda to item number 8, and a word from the VP, our honorable VP, one and only. Oh, did you like his outfit today? If you didn't see it, go watch the program today. Mr. VP, you are recognized, sir.